Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm
Hi.
Edith. Hiya.
Wonderful. Just wonderful.
I'm Edith Meeks. I'm the executive and artistic director of HB Studio, and with me is Pat Golden, who's leading a project this year with acting and directing students at HB Studio to explore the work of Lorraine Hansberry.
We began with a scene study workshop this fall, and we explored Miss Hansberry's plays, The Drinking Gourd, What Use Are Flowers, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window, and Le Blanc. And I've been working with students in a lab this winter exploring Le Blanc as an experiment for the new world in which we find ourselves living in today.
And Pat and I are pleased and excited to welcome Mario Sprouse and Chiz Schultz to HB in the Cloud today to talk about Lorraine Hansberry and the documentary Chiz produced with Tracy Heather Strain and Randall McLowry, Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart.
Well,
This
thank
documentary,
thank you so much.
Sure. This documentary is available to members of the HB community online this month. If you haven't already seen it, please do watch it. You have till the end of March. And through this film and this conversation, we hope to share more widely outside the studio classroom this opportunity to get to know Lorraine Hansberry's life and her work.
Mario is a musician, musical director, and composer, and leads the arts ministry at Marble Collegiate Church. Chiz has an extraordinary resume as a producer, as you'll learn. This conversation started at one of Mario's Monday events for Black History Month with a screening of the film, and they have graciously accepted our invitation to continue their dialogue about it with us here today. Welcome, Mario and Chiz.
Thank you. Chiz and I both welcome you to our little office here. We're in Nyack, New York. I'm in Chiz's office, and I've taken over so that you can see. This is where we did the previous dialogue for Black History Month for Marble Collegiate Church, the arts ministry. And we started a wonderful conversation about Lorraine Hansberry concerning how Chiz got involved with it. But we're going to repeat some of that just so that you can have the opportunity to hear how this all started. And then we're going to dive into activist and artist Lorraine Hansberry. So Chiz, would you tell the crew how you got this property in the first place and what attracted you to Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart?
Well, I had always admired the work of Lorraine Hansberry. I had seen the play. I had read about the play. I knew Bob Nemiroff, Lorraine Hansberry's husband. And at one point, Bob said to me, wouldn't it be good if we could do a documentary about Lorraine? And I thought that was a wonderful idea. No one had done it. And that's how I got involved.
How long did it take from that conversation with Bob until you were able to bring to life Seeing Eyes, Feeling Heart?
I think it took maybe about a year. I know when I first went to Channel 13 and proposed a documentary on Lorraine Hansberry, the woman in charge said, I'm not sure she's worth a half an hour. I still remember that.
Wow.
So then I went to PBS rather than Channel 13. And I said, what about a documentary on Lorraine Hansberry? And they were very, very excited. And they gave me a go-ahead, and that's how we were able to get the funding. But all in all, I think it was about a year before I could actually start production.
And how long did production take?
Production was pretty fast. I mean, we interviewed a lot of people, maybe 6 months, if I remember. I remember at one point calling Sidney Poitier and saying that I wanted to come out to Los Angeles to interview him for the documentary. And he said, Chiz, I'm in my 80s. I really can barely sit up in a chair for more than 20 minutes. I'm sorry, but I just can't do it. And I said, Sydney, I'm almost in my 80s, and I'm willing to go out there with a camera crew, a sound person, and just interview you for 15 minutes. There was a long pause, and he said, come on out.
Well, I'm very glad that, that he invited you to do that. You're very persuasive, Chiz. I need you in my life more. There's some people I need for you to speak to. Now, what was there about, I know you admired Lorraine Hansberry's work, but what was there about her work that captivated you or that you admired?
I think she was able to capture a Black family as no one ever had. She was able to bring to thousands of people through her play what a Black family was like. That really had not been done. And after the success on Broadway, I think A Raisin in the Sun was one of the most performed plays throughout the world, almost next to Shakespeare. It was translated into every language because it had to do with family. It was just so brilliant, so that whether you were white or brown or Asian or whatever, you responded to it. It told a truth that you could respond to. And so as a result, it was extraordinarily popular.
There was one point in the film where I guess it was playing in Philadelphia, and the director went out into the lobby to talk with people coming into the theater and met a woman and asked her, why are you spending more money to see the play than to see Sidney Poitier at the theater down the street? And she said that she had heard that there was something that concerns me, something that concerns her in that work. I would probably say that she would not have seen many, if any, plays before, especially Black plays of this nature, because there weren't any. Have you had any other type of reaction, as you can remember, to this documentary about Lorraine Hansberry as opposed to A Raisin in the Sun?
No, I think what that woman said carries over into the documentary almost. I think people just responded to it so strongly. And I think they also responded to Lorraine Hansberry. I mean, that very short life. I mean, she died at 34, which is incredible. But her legacy just lived on and on.
Last time we spoke about the outlet for Black writers, the outlet for people of color, the outlet of any artist who's wanting to get things going. And at this time when Lorraine was writing, there was the Black arts movement. There was all kinds of people who were doing theater and writing and acting and dancing and singing, and all of that sort of stuff was going on. Amiri Baraka, who's in the documentary, when he was Leroy Jones, started that movement that gave birth to so much during the 60s and the 70s. Where is that now?
I often wonder where that is. I still remember the number of Black theater groups, all kinds of groups that existed in New York, both up in Harlem and downtown. Black Theater Alliance, I could go on and on. That really isn't here now. It just doesn't exist. I don't know where it is. I'm sure there's some very good Black theater groups I don't know about that exist, but it's very, very different from then.
Of course, now you have the addition of the LGBTQ plus community. You have Latinos, you have Asian, you have, you name it, people of color. And there are some theaters like the National Black Theater. There's the Billie Holiday Theater out in Brooklyn, and there are a few others. But that atmosphere of, that's the activism part that I was really interested in, is because she addressed it full on. Her art reflected the times, and she was able to provocatively insert her ideas and just bring them to the fore. That took a tremendous amount of courage. What do you think Lorraine Hansberry, if she were alive today, what would she be involved with now, do you think?
Oh, I think she would have kept writing. I think she would have been an activist. Uh, she would be involved in Black Lives Matter. Uh, she would be a vibrant voice and force today if she still lived. And she would still be writing, hopefully a lot of good plays.
Oh yeah, in fact, in the documentary, it seems obvious, but she says, I'm a writer. I write. This is what I do. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because a very good friend of mine, Mary Miller, who lives in Georgia, near Brunswick, Georgia, which is where Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, when there were demonstrations, what she was saying was, I'm a writer. I write plays. I can't go out and join, the revolution, the fight, the this, the that. Yeah, I write plays, and such is the power of a writer who writes and who is an activist to get the material out there. In your experience, what do you see thwarts that? What stops people from writing or taking that courage? Is it no place for it to go? Is it, I don't have a director, I don't have a theater, I don't have an outlet? What do you think?
Well, for a long time, and unfortunately it still exists, there has been a prejudice against Black theater, against Black movies, against Black writers. That still goes on. It takes, I know with Raisin, the producer said, this is so good, I want to do it on Broadway. And everyone said, you're nuts. You can't possibly do a Black play on Broadway and make money. But he persisted and he raised the money and he got it on Broadway and it was a big hit. But then there wasn't a whole series of other Black plays that followed. Anyone who wants to do that has a tremendous amount to fight, still today.
I like that quote in the documentary where the director said that ultimately greed triumphs over bigotry.
Exactly.
If you can see it can make some money doing this, it can happen. But I'm concerned that especially today, especially now when you have so many issues right up front, right in your face, day after day after day after day, that there might not be as many potent outlets for that kind of expression. Is there anything that we can do? I know, for example, right now, I mean, what Pat is doing with the class at HB about Lorraine Hansberry's work, you can't get into that work without dealing with her activism. What can be done today, do you think, to advance that? Because those voices are sorely needed.
Sorely needed. I'm not sure what could be done except what HB is doing is what can be done, not just by HB, but by other groups. And I think the more people know about Hansberry and the more people know about A Raisin in the Sun can inspire other work, can inspire other Black writers. But it's a tough battle. It's a tough battle. It always has been.
I'm also curious about, and we talked about this before, your next project. And I'm mentioning this because at that time, which is about a month ago, or 3 weeks ago, you had mentioned that nothing was happening right at that particular moment, but, and I said, almost flippantly, well, send your scripts to me. I'll go through all of them and get them to Chiz. But but seriously, from the standpoint of what you would want to do, what kinds of themes, what kinds of issues are in front of you that you would like to express?
What kind of issues today?
Yes.
Well, it's amazing when the whole Black Lives Matter thing took off. That was a really good example of what could be done and what sort of took fire at the time. There's so much that could be still addressed by theater, film, novels, everything. It's wide open, but it needs encouragement. There are a lot of very good young Black writers who need to be encouraged. And I'm not sure where that comes from, uh, but it should come from the Hollywood producers. It should come from publishers to encourage that kind of thing.
Wow, that's like a utopia, but I would be hoping for that. Uh, in addition to Lorraine Hansberry being an incredible writer and activist, she was very focused on what she wanted to accomplish. And as I mentioned, she came out of or was part of the Black arts movement, which combined art and politics. It was a way of utilizing art and its ramifications to address political issues. And it lasted mid-60s to mid-70s and produced a number of different types of artists. Is there a voice for, and I need to couch this carefully because it addresses it in the documentary, Black writers writing Black material, or is the material Black and it doesn't matter who writes it? You and I briefly discussed that the last time. And as I had mentioned then, as you know, I worked for Gordon Parks for 20 years until his death in 2006. And he was addressed with that same issue. Gordon, how can you write a play other than that's Black? You're not qualified, or, why don't you just stay in your lane? And his answer at that point was, I'm a writer, I'm a director. This is what I do. What's your view on that?
I think that's exactly right. I think, I know there was I can't remember the name, but a novel came out recently about a Black family, and it was a white writer. And a lot of it got wonderful reviews, but a lot of people pounced on it, said, how can that woman write Black material? It's not right. She has no right to do it. That's the kind of absurd thinking that's just nuts, that a Black writer can't write about a white family, and vice versa, or anything like that. A writer is a writer, and they find their material wherever they can and whatever excites them and whatever can tell the truth to other people, whether they're Black or white, and what the material is. So that's how I feel.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way because I feel the same way. But the opposition to that, as you mentioned, can be massive on both sides of the issue or all sides of the issue. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like Lorraine Hansberry's courage, because she did stuff anyway. She had that fire in her heart. And I would encourage all people who are writers to be able to think outside of your comfort zone and do what you feel is right, what is in your heart. It may be a difficult road, but so what? Go out there and do it anyway. I was mentioning earlier to Pat and to Edith that I found a recording of people stars who performed parts of Lorraine Hansberry's work after her death. It's on WBAI. There's a link that we can put up so that people might be able to search that out. Uta Hagen was one of those people who was reading from Lorraine Hansberry's work. And since Uta certainly was an activist as well as just a wonderful, wonderful artist, I think the both of them, in that time would have been, I want to say collaborators, friends. They would have understood one another. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Hagen was way ahead of her time. And she also was very, very involved in the Black movement at that time. She worked with Paul Robeson. She worked with a lot of people, and it just wasn't done then. But Hagen did it. She was ahead of her time. It's good you brought her up.
Yeah, and I was surprised because if I were to just read, and I'm going to just take a moment to read some of the people who were on the part 2 of this 3-part recording through WBAI. There was Paul Robeson, Teresa Wright, Anne Bancroft, Al Freeman Jr., Barbara Ann Teer, Gloria Foster, Lauren Bacall, E.G. Marshall, James Earl Jones, Claudia McNeil, Diana Sands, Maureen Stapleton, Cicely Tyson, and the name goes, the list goes on. These were people who were at the absolute top of their craft, and they were all honoring Lorraine Hansberry for her writing a year after her death. And I was very happy that Uta Hagen was part of that. What was that atmosphere like in the West Village during the 60s, or when Lorraine Hansberry was hanging out down there? I know the documentary went into it a bit, but from the standpoint of what Uta Hagen and Lorraine Hansberry and many, many others would have experienced, what is your recollection of that?
Of the West Village?
Yes, at that time.
It was just a very extraordinarily creative time for poetry, for plays, for music. Jose Quintero had his theater group. There were cafes that had wonderful artists performing all the time. The West Village was just vibrant with all kinds of artists. It was a wonderful, wonderful time.
So how can we bring that back?
I think it'd be tough, but it could happen. It could suddenly happen.
I agree with that. The Black arts movement lasted maybe 10 or 11 years, but gave rise to lots of theatrical and artistic expression.
Yes.
I'm wondering what we might be able to do in addition to what's happening at HB currently to foster that. I know that there's the Harlem School of the Arts and there's Studio Museum. There are other places around town, but she had a cause that she just latched onto. What would be the cause today that might spark that kind of a revival, if you will?
I don't know. It's for the whole Black Lives Matter thing, which suddenly came up and became very powerful. I mean, that's something that could be latched onto. And that could also spawn some additional things for writers. It's hard to say because these things sort of happen suddenly and out of the blue, and you don't know where they come from.
The Lorraine Hansberry's difficult work to me was Les Blancs. When I say difficult, I mean it was at the end of her life, and trying to put that all together, dealing with the end of the era of colonialism, officially, I suppose, in Africa. That was a tough topic to deal with, and still today, I'm sure. In my travels to Africa, it's part of what you see. I'm wondering what other tough topics people might be able to tackle that would have as great an impact as A Raisin in the Sun.
Tough to say, except for the LBGT community. I'm not sure anything has happened like Raisin for that community. But that certainly is one area that I keep waiting to be addressed. One thing, and this is not an answer to your question, but something that always struck me and I'll never forget was I was interviewing, we were talking about Raisin in the Sun, and I was interviewing the young actor who played Sidney Poitier's son.
Oh, Glenn Turman, yeah.
And I said, what was it like, night after night, to have Sidney Poitier tell you what it was like to be a Black man? That extraordinary speech that Hansberry wrote. What was that like for you as a young Black man? And he said, he spit on me. He said every night when he gave that speech, he just spit on me. I didn't hear any of it. All I was thinking about was getting drenched.
Oh my God.
And that's still one of my favorite memories of something when I was really waiting for a
Profound answer.
profound answer.
It's the
And I
technique.
got a truthful one.
Well, now you touched on something that I see is also part of the Q&A that has come forward. Both Lorraine Hansberry and James Baldwin, working together there, were gay, and had to, or at least in her case, it came out much later on. And each culture perhaps deals with gayness differently depending on the decade. Now, of course, it's out in the open and has been for a while. Not that it's easy, but in her case, it was different. It was difficult to carry, to be herself and that activist and be gay at the same time. Do you have any opinion about that, or how difficult it might have been, or can you reflect on that?
I think it was very difficult for them then. I think it's much different now. Uh, but then at some point, people, some of our top writers, actors, whatever, kept all that hidden. And we're really terribly afraid it might come out that they were gay. Luckily, that doesn't happen anymore to that degree. There's a little bit still, of course. Some people think they have to protect themselves, but there's a whole different feeling today in the arts, and thank God for it.
Mm. Throughout all that, she was able to produce and able to put her
I'm sorry,
art out.
who?
Throughout all of it,
Yes,
she was able to just continue to produce. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of, I could identify when she talked about loneliness, being alone, writing and being alone. Has that been your experience as well, even as an artist or as a director, as a producer?
yes, I know. Her husband, Bob Nemiroff, was a good friend of mine. And all the time I knew Bob, and he was with Lorraine, I never knew that they really weren't together, that Lorraine had her own life as a gay woman, but they kept this marriage thing sort of open uh, and visible to people as a protection for both of them, actually. And Bob was just so supportive of her and so supportive of her life, and also so responsible for her work being done.
Mm-hmm.
He put together the off-Broadway play To Be Young, Gifted, and Black,
Yes.
composed of her work. And I was at that time working with Harry Belafonte, and we produced that with him off-Broadway for the first time. And that was like just a wonderful, wonderful thing to bring her work out that way. And then from then on, other stuff followed.
Mm. What do you think is the role of artists and art in society as a whole?
To tell the truth.
Mm.
And that's also one of the hardest things to do, because often the truth is very painful. Often people don't want to hear the truth, but they should. So I think for creative people, for writers, directors, actors, it doesn't matter. Being able to tell the truth, the real truth, even if it's painful, is their responsibility.
I was reading online about Uta Hagen, and one of the words that is used is she spoke the truth.
Yeah.
She was the truth. And she demanded that from the people that she was working with or that she was teaching. That's a difficult thing to do because you might not get the outlet for that truth to be spoken. I can write the truth in a poem, but nobody may ever read it. how can we, or do you think, what are some of the steps that can be taken to get the truth out there? Because the truth has to come from somewhere, it has to come from within. And knowing yourself and your art is great, but how can we get more of the truth, whether people want to hear it or not, out there?
Well, I think one way is just what you're doing, talking about it. People don't talk about this. You're talking about it. You're asking about it. I think I think some of our better writers should write about it. I think it's a very, very important subject that in a way has been neglected. And I think it would be terrific if people suddenly address this, just what you're saying, and brought it to the attention of everyone.
I would love to hear how our audience feels about bringing that kind of truth, because it is difficult. You know, you're going to get arrows sent your way because of telling the truth. What are some of the struggles that you have gone through as artists, as directors, as writers, as producers, to tell the truth? I would be interested in hearing some questions about that. And also from Pat, teaching that class, what kinds of issues have come up concerning telling that truth? One of the things that Lorraine Hansberry did was relentlessly tell the truth. Tell the truth. And I know that Uta Hagen certainly had been blacklisted in the 1950s, that whole McCarthy era. Telling the truth would land you on the blacklist, you know, among other things. So it takes a lot of courage. Pat, what do you think?
Well, I think that what we're attempting to do with our experiment of Les Blanc is to apply the truth that Lorraine Hansberry tells in that play to all peoples who have been colonized. In other words, people in Southeast Asia, people in South America, the Irish people, Native Americans, everybody, which, I mean, it's almost pretty much every continent on the planet has been touched by colonization to some degree or another. And one of the things that our experiment includes is recognizing and acknowledging that truth. So her play is, that play in particular is so universal. Yes, it's written, it's written as a, a fictitious country in Africa, but it applies, what happens there applies to so many different cultures and so many different countries and so many different peoples.
What has been the response in your class from people going through this not just difficult play in terms of the play itself, but the topic? I mean, the subject matter.
Yeah, pretty much I've got about, I think, 8 directing students, and then we have, almost 40 actors. Wow. And everybody who's involved is very enthusiastic and understands the approach and the reason behind it, and even had some realizations themselves in working on the material. One of our directors is German, one is Belgian, 2 are American women, Black women. One is half Filipino, half Irish. One is from the Middle East. So what we did initially was to look at these various cultures and who had been colonized and how that worked and when, and just the history of it. We used that as a starting point from which to understand colonization and its effects on the people that specifically that Lorraine was writing about at that time, but it, as we know, is much wider than that and applies even to today. All we have to do is look across the pond.
Yes, that's true. Chiz, I'm wondering whether or not, along with what Pat is saying concerning speaking about the times, colonization is very prevalent and has been for centuries. Is there still room for a new play like LeBlanc? Is there room for that kind of play that's that direct and that truthful today? I mean, if there were a new work about that, would that still be as relevant today, coming from a new voice as opposed to coming from Lorraine Hansberry?
I think the answer is yes. I think it's just a very simple answer. Uh, there's always room for that. And you just wait for that playwright, that writer to speak the truth, to bring that out. Yes.
Great. Pat, do you think this is more just from a personal standpoint, your own career, the things that you've been doing? Why did you choose Lorraine Hansberry? Or why was that chosen in terms of the performance lab?
Well, I directed a workshop production about, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago of LeBlanc, and absolutely loved the play. I mean, it reads one way on the page, and then when you get actors and stand it up and add some drums and add some dancers to it, I was shocked even more so than when I read it, when we actually saw it, as to how relevant it still is today. And that would, and where we are now, like you said, with, it's Black Lives Matter. And the interesting thing to me about Black Lives Matter is that there are so many white people, so many Asian people, so many Native Americans, so many Latinx involved in the movement. I mean, I saw a march snaking through the streets of Brooklyn last summer, and it just went on and went on. I know there were like thousands and thousands of people. It did not get widely covered, but I was stricken by the amount of support from all corners. And I think that's a kind of a turning point for us all. And so then I went back to LeBlanc, because that's like a recognition of, through LeBlanc, we're attempting in our experiment to recognize the plight that not only Africans have gone through, that not only Native Americans have gone through, that indigenous South Americans have gone through, that indigenous New Zealanders and Australians, Southeast Asians, it kind of spans the globe. And I wanted to acknowledge that in a really strong way.
You had mentioned that parade. What struck me, Chiz, and you might remember this, and I'm certainly old enough to remember this, in the 1960s, shortly after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, you had March on Washington, you had all of this stuff going on. But then Black Power came into prominence shortly after Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination. And there was this thrust to get white folks out of the Black Power movement. Just get them out, because, what do they know about what we're struggling for? And then a decade or so later, it was, oh, wait, it's just like Pat, you were saying, people have been colonized. It doesn't matter the color of the skin. People have been, this has happened. Come back in, let's see what we can do together. And I'm happy that it's multicultural in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement. But I'm also wanting to know, are there any voices that you hear today, either Chiz or Pat, of, can't we just keep this to ourselves? If it's Black Lives Matter, can't we just sort of do it ourselves and be Black and handle this ourselves without involving everybody else?
I haven't heard that directly. I'm sure there with some people probably is an underlying sentiment. I realize that our experiment with LeBlanc, that I could get completely blasted in that way for doing that, for doing what we've done.
Yes.
But it's chance of I'm willing to take, and with the support from HB and from Edith specifically, to allow us the freedom do that, because I don't see how else we can make progress and step forward if we just stay in our own little, if we only stay in our own little boxes. And that is in and of itself is a form of segregation.
Yes.
And I wanted to like remove those walls and open the whole thing up. That was my thinking. But I'm prepared. I don't know how prepared I am. I don't know if I'm as courageous as Lorraine was, but I realized that I could get completely, blasted for what we're, for our experiment.
Well, I think all of us, Chiz, myself, you, Edith, we have some scars on our bodies from those battles. Chiz, I'm thinking of your own career, the things that you've done. You have a documentary about Paul Robeson, and certainly he was a character who was blasted for being Paul Robeson. What has been your experience? Have you had any of that experience being a white producer, a white director, a white artist, wanting to or seeking to bring about, bringing forth the work of Black artists, Black performers? Have you been blasted?
It's interesting. I was teaching at the time, and I would ask my class what they knew about Paul Robeson. And they said, who's that? No one knew him. The United States government, McCarthy and the FBI, were extremely successful in wiping him out. They took away his passport so he couldn't travel. They called him a communist. But the thing they did that most people don't realize is devastating. They contacted all of the textbook publishers and had them remove his name from every textbook that went to the schools in the United States.
Oh my God.
So when I would say, I want to do something on Paul Robeson, they would say, who's that? I can't tell you. I would say 99% of the people I would talk to had never heard the name. The FBI was extremely successful in wiping him out that way. And so that made it all the more challenging for me and exciting for me to be able to bring him into a documentary so that people would finally say, oh, that's who Paul Robeson was. I had no idea that he was a major concert singer. He was a major Broadway actor. He was a major Hollywood star. He was a major football player. He was a lawyer. This extraordinary man that no one had ever heard of. So it was just like wonderful to be able to bring that out.
Wow. Erased. I'm in shock. Just being in shock. Hearing that, we certainly can't have that happen to Lorraine Hansberry, but maybe we need to do a performance lab on Paul Robeson's work. Okay, Edith, that's just a hint. I think maybe that would be the kind of work, because Chiz, just viscerally, it hurt me when you said that he was erased.
That he what?
That he was erased. That that his life was just erased from the textbooks. I can't imagine that happening to anyone, except that one of the reasons why we did the documentary about Lorraine Hansberry, so that it wouldn't be erased, that her life wouldn't just be a matter of history. It's a part of the American history. And so we've got to tell the truth. We've got to tell the entire story. And Pat, I applaud you and Edith for the courage it would take to do something like what you're doing now, certainly with Lorraine Hansberry, but also with the many others whose lives have been erased. We just don't know about their artwork unless you have gray hair on your head like me and Chiz. You're not going to remember people like that. but their artistry, their voices are tremendous. And as you saw in the documentary, Paul Robeson spoke at her funeral. And they were compatriots in that sense, both working towards that cause. Pat, do you have any concerning the what you're doing now? And aside from Paul Robeson, are there any things that you feel that can come forward now, doing this kind of work of the lab, getting the writers ready, getting the voices ready? Is there something that you can see that you would like to do?
Well, I have a whole list of things, but I think it opens the door for a different viewpoint, not necessarily a different viewpoint, but a different way of thinking about culture and various cultures, and rather than isolating ourselves and segregating ourselves, whether it's self-segregation or imposed by government, et cetera, we can realize that we just really don't have to live that way. And in theater, I think of diversity as a two-way street. We're diversifying the casts in Shakespeare, Tennessee Williams, and this, that, and the other. The Albee estate we know is refused, but in different places. And for me, it's a two-way street. And Lorraine Hansberry's work is classic, majorly important, and doesn't just apply to the Black population.
What about the sun in Sidney Brustein's window as a work? Is that, Chiz, something that you were interested in, or something that you saw? I mean, it didn't run a long time, but it's a very powerful play.
It's a very powerful play. It's a very good play. And I keep hoping that someone is going to do it again, bring it back, off Broadway, whatever, because she tells a lot of truths in that. And I think part of the fact that Raised in the Sun was such a hit, and that she was Black and Raised in the Sun was predominantly about a Black family, they rejected the fact that she could write sign in Sidney Brustein's window. Said she should really stick to the Black, which is absurd, because it's a wonderful play.
It is.
So,
we did.
Yes, go ahead, Pat, please.
We explored. We read and explored sign in Sidney Brustein's window in the fall, and everyone was stricken by particularly by the second act. I mean, there's a lot of setup in the first act, and the second act, just what happens, particularly with there's one character, as you know, Chiz, that is a light-skinned Black man, and he's kind of passing, or maybe passing, or not passing, and just exploding all of that, that she talks about it, and people's reactions to that. The other characters who are all. He's the only Black character in the play, and everybody else is white. And I assume, I know you would know better. I assume some of it's based on her life living with Bob in the village, I would assume.
Yeah. You have your assignment, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. I will execute that assignment.
Wow. I'm mindful of the time. We have maybe 8 minutes left or so. I don't know if there are any questions that people would ask. I have been addressing some of the issues in the chat so that we can talk about those issues. But if there's something else that you would like to hear from Chiz about, or from Pat, or from myself, please let us know. I had mentioned something about Black history is our history. This is Women's Month. And of course, I try to play a trick. And the trick is between January 15th, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and the end of March, the end of Women's Month. In those 10 or 11 weeks, I can probably get Black women writers all through the month. I'm going to cover Black History Month right through the Women's Month. And so for this program, of course, it's about Lorraine Hansberry being a Black woman. raised in Mexico City, which is another story altogether. I'm not going to get into that. There are a number of Black Mexicans from just going south all the way past Texas into Mexico. But there's a lot of, we have a lot of stories to tell. And each of them is going to take a lot of courage. And I'm happy that you're dealing with such a difficult subject of where truth is required in LeBlanc, but also this, you're coming from that history and from that legacy of Uta Hagen telling the truth and being the truth and bringing that forward. Let me see, there's a question in the chat.
Mario, may I?
Yes.
I just have a technical question from a production standpoint. Chiz, what was your budget like for Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, what was your budget like for Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart? What was your budget like?
For Sighted Eyes?
Yeah.
I don't remember. I'd like to take a guess and give you a figure, but I honestly can't remember.
Yeah, that's okay. How long did it take you to shoot?
We couldn't raise a lot. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough.
That's what's important. How long did you shoot? How long were you in pre-production and production and post?
I think pre-production maybe 3 to 4 months. And then production is always fast, like 2 weeks. And then post-production is like 2 months ago.
Yeah, right.
2 to 3 months. But the shoot
Thank
itself and the interviews, all that is very short.
We have a question here about where did all those beautiful home movies in the documentary come from? I'm curious about how they were able to bring that together in with different friends and family of Lorraine. How did that unfold?
We just contacted everyone we could and told them what we were doing and what we needed and got them.
Were there any surprises in doing the documentary as you were putting it together, either in pre or production or even post-production? Were there any surprises, things you didn't expect to hear about Lorraine or about that whole process?
No, I think because Bob Nemiroff was a friend, and then I knew Bob, I guess I was still a little startled to find out how much they lived separate lives after Lorraine led her life, her gay life, and Bob kept up the front that they were married. I guess that was a surprise to me. Not a shock, but just sort of a surprise that they were able to keep that so separate so that really no one knew.
Do you address that in the class, Pat, about her being gay through the currency of the LGBTQ plus community?
I found a couple of articles which we read in the scene study class and talked about that, and certainly saw the documentary about it. It was interesting that her dual life was interesting. Yeah, we certainly didn't avoid it, but I guess we didn't concentrate on it terribly much because I don't know how much information there actually is, you know, and then it starts to get, you know, gossipy and all that. I don't want to do that. So,
right.
But I mean, it's certainly her living a dual life like that must not have been easy, I wouldn't think.
Yeah. And Chiz, I think if I read correctly, there was an earlier attempt to do this documentary or a documentary or something about her life. How did that get revisited by you?
How did what?
How did it get revisited? I may not be phrasing it right. There was an earlier attempt to do the documentary, and apparently it may not have gone anywhere. Maybe it was unsuccessful. Were you aware of that?
No.
Ah, okay. I think I had read that somewhere where someone had tried to do a documentary about her life and it just didn't pan out.
They probably ran into what I did when I first approached 13, And they said she isn't worth a half an hour.
Uh,
Well,
Wow.
that's probably what happened to the first producer.
Well, that may, that's right, that may have been the case. Pat, and concerning your, yes, go ahead, please.
No, oh, I was just going to ask Chiz, did you go through the archives at the Schomburg, and how long did it take you to do that?
How long?
To go through the archives at the Schomburg. That'll take you forever. I've done that before.
Long time.
Yeah,
That's what it is.
that's a long
Were
process.
were there any personal papers or letters or from any of her lovers or anything in that information that you found?
No, it was all interesting. It was all fascinating, but there was nothing that, I guess nothing surprised us. But there were some very useful papers and letters and stuff that sort of filled out who she was and her dealings.
There's an interesting point here from Erin Young. She says, whoops, it just moved. There is a study that recently came out about Black representation in film and television. It states the number of off-screen and on-screen Black talent increases by the number of Black producers attached to a project. However, only 6% of producers are Black. What are some of the hurdles that a Black producer would want to or would face coming into this industry? Again, I'm speaking from the experience of working with Gordon Parks. I know when he did a film, everybody on the film was Black. That's how they joined the union. I mean, at that time, this is 1969, 1970. Where do Black, I know there are Black production organizations, but what do you think, Chiz?
It's racism. I mean, it's just simple. White producers, white directors, white writers just have a better chance, have a better opportunity. Because if a Black producer comes along with a project, a Black writer, Black director, the first thought of the production companies or the people who fund them say, well, that Black audience is very small. I mean, just that simple.
Well, we're going to have to change that. And I think, Pat, you're working on that. Edith is working on that. I'm working on that. Chiz is working on that.
Chiz has been working on that for a long time. Thank you, Chiz.
I know. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely, Chiz. And thank you, HB, for this platform, this webinar. It will continue to go on because the truth still needs to be told. What better place than the theater? Where, if the play is the thing to catch the conscience of the king, I guess the play can do that all the way around. And so I'm very thankful for HB in having this experiment of Lorraine Hansberry in the Performance Lab, but also for people like Chiz who have for decades put his work on the line to be able to bring a lot of this, of what we were talking about, to life. It's one thing to speak about it, and it's another thing to bring it to life. And if you look at Chiz's resume, you will see that he's brought quite a bit to life. And that to me is the end game, to bring it to life. We would not know anything about Lorraine Hansberry's work if somebody didn't take a chance to bring it to life. So here's to all of those who have had the courage and the foresight and the vision to bring all of these voices, all of these truths to life. And I pray that we all have the courage to do so and continue to do so. So thank you, Chiz. Thank you very much. And thank you, Pat, for participating. I know I put you on the spot. I have a habit of doing that. I will just call your name and then just draw you in and do stuff like that. But I felt it was important to get an inside view as to what was happening in the lab, and then, what your own hopes and visions and dreams are as well.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm always very, very happy to see Chiz and to meet you. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you both
welcome.
so much. Just a splendid conversation.
Well, I am done. I mean, I could go on and talk about a lot of other things, including Star Trek, but I think this portion is over. So I'll give it back to Edith.
Thank you so much. Just really a fabulous conversation, and we've learned so much from both of you, and I hope we can do it again. We have another talk to do maybe one day about Paul Robeson, I hope before too long.
Yes.
And we really appreciate you taking this time with us. Thank you all for coming out and for
Thank
your
you.
questions.
Thank you for having us. And we're the Chiz and Mario show. So
Yeah.
we'll go wherever you send us.
Great. We want more Chiz and Mario. Great.
You got it. No problem at all.
You're a
Thanks so
good boat
much.
show.
Thank you. Bye-bye.